I do feel like when it comes to work, it can be harder, but I've often said this. I feel like everyone at some point should lose their job. And not saying I wish that on everybody, because it's a very devastating experience. But I know for me, that was one of the most helpful experiences in my career, because you got past this fear of, if this ever happens, my world is over. Like there's no coming back from it. And going through that actually helped curb some of that fear, where I learned, oh, I mean, yeah, it really sucked and it wasn't fun and I didn't enjoy this, but the world didn't end. And I think that helped build some confidence in, no, you still need to be diplomatic. I look back at some of my 20-ish years and go, I can't believe that I didn't run into more, spikes. But I think about that and go, but it did help me go, well, yeah, but at the end of the day, my life doesn't end if this. And so you hold it with a bit of an open hand, which does make it easier to be more reasonable and go, hey, if I do say no, because ultimately this is going to cost me way more than I'm willing to. If you really are working for a boss who goes, I don't care if this kills you, get it done. Maybe if they ultimately do say, you're out of here, you'll live and you might be in a better place on the other side.
Right. And I think, that what you're talking about is the extreme end where you lost
That's
your
the
job.
extreme end, which
But
it
I
almost
think,
never goes there.
well, but the thing that people often miss is that, and now I say this, and then we're in an age of layoffs where, yeah, it is just over.
They are
But
real.
oftentimes, some of the people who are afraid to say no are the people who are the top performers or the very good performers. And the difference between good performer and average performer, you actually might still, by saying no, you're not going to drop down to fired just because
No,
you said no to this one thing.
no.
And so but for each individual, and each situation is different, right? So
Yes.
knowing how that works with your boss and your boss's boss and your workplace, on how do you say no and stand up for your life balance and this kind of thing. Like, you can be more productive. Just because you said no to something does not mean that you are downgraded to fired.
No.
Oftentimes, actually understanding what it looks like. And this is an interesting conversation. If you haven't had this conversation with your boss, I absolutely advocate it, which is have a conversation about, generally, in a performance review, there's performance metrics. And if it's not already expressly said, have your boss say, all right, someone in my position, tell me what they do at the top level. Tell me what they do at the next level, and then at this level. And, we talked about having applicable examples for themselves. And you'll start to see where it's helpful for you to have the context on what are those different levels, what does
Yeah.
that look like, and have them be explicit for you in your position. What would I look like as an average performer? What would I look like as a above average? What would be top? What would be bottom? And that way you truly know what the spectrum is, because some people are stuck right here, and that's all there is. And so understanding that breadth
But
is,
there's a much broader spectrum. And yeah, again, that pushing back in a productive way is not going to take you from the top of the spectrum to the bottom of the pile. Because when you see the spectrum for as big as it is, you recognize there's more room to flex in there than if it's only this thick. Then yeah, you are going to be a little more nervous that, oh boy, this might really knock me back. And I think to your point on that, um, a lot of the things we've discussed in this conversation, and this does make a huge difference, is how you approach this matters a lot. I mean,
true.
over the years, like I said, I'm surprised at some of the things that I did if I reflect back in my early career years. But I've seen, just from making a lot of mistakes over the years, the way you do it does make a big difference. And my personal experience has been, if you are that well-intended, okay, if you're that difficult curmudgeon, that's a different story. But if you're that well-intentioned person who actually is asking deep, thoughtful questions, trying to understand, really truly has a desire to help,
Yeah.
albeit you want to understand, maybe do things differently, figure out how if you really are genuinely approaching that, my experience has been that actually moves you up the spectrum, because instead of just being that person that I say something you go off and get it done. But if you really think about it, when you're that person that does that, how often do you go get it done and it's actually done right because you didn't even ask the questions in the first place? You just charge down a path and you end up in that cycle going back to productivity. Now you've wasted 10 times as much of your time because you didn't actually figure out what was needed. And I've actually found it's counterintuitive, but taking the time to slow down, ask those questions, be more thoughtful, and sometimes say, I don't think that's going to work, or I think we might have to think about that differently, or what's going to move instead to make room for that. I've actually found that's moved me up the scale and made me a more thoughtful partner
Right.
than, oh, that person's so difficult.